The sound was the first thing to go. One moment, the world was the violent, percussive thump, thump, thump of the helicopter blades chopping at the grave-cold air. The next, there was only the wind. I stood on the steel grate landing of my new home, watching the chopper shrink into a black dragonfly against a bruised purple sky, its noise swallowed whole by the immense, hungry silence of the Alaskan wilderness. A clean break, I'd told myself. A way to trade the cacophony of my old life. The blaring horns, the screaming arguments, the suffocating hum of a city that never slept, for something pure, for solitude. I'd imagined peaceful silence, the kind you read about in books. I was wrong. Call it. This was Lookout Tower 7, my post for the next 6 months. From the ground, it was a skeletal finger of rust-colored steel pointing an accusation at the heavens. My living space, the cabin at the top, wasn't a cabin at all. It was a cage, a 10 by 10 foot room walled on all 4 sides by thick panes of glass, suspended 30 feet in the air. As I hauled my duffel bag up the final, shuddering flight of stairs and stepped inside, the feeling was immediate and deeply unnerving. I wasn't in a sanctuary, I was on a stage, a display case for an audience of endless spruce, granite, and an indifferent, watching sky. The silence here wasn't empty. It was heavy, a physical weight that pressed in on the glass and settled on my shoulders. It was a pressure in my ears, a deep, resonant hum that felt like it was coming from the guts of the earth itself. The only thing that broke it was the wind. It didn't whistle or whisper. It howled, a low, mournful cry that vibrated through the tower's steel bones, making the whole structure groan like a ship in a storm. It sounded ancient and lonely, and a part of me, a primal, animal part, wanted to howl back. Habit is a fortress against the strange. I clung to it. I unpacked with methodical precision, turning my back on the panoramic, intimidating view. Cans of beans and stew were arranged on the small shelf, a fortress of aluminum. I rolled out my sleeping bag, its synthetic rustle, an obscenely loud intrusion into the quiet. I checked the Osborne firefinder, the brass circle in the center of the room, running my fingers over the map beneath its glass. Everything was a name, a line, an elevation marker, a futile human attempt to tame the sprawling, raw power I could see stretching to every horizon. The land was a beast of its own. It wasn't beautiful, not in the way of postcards. It was brutal, a jagged sea of dark green and gray, its waves frozen mid-crash. In the distance, the Chugach Mountains scraped the sky with teeth of rock and ice. There were no roads, no trails, no sign that another human being had ever existed. I was the only living thing for 100 miles in any direction. I knew that was a fact. But it didn't feel true. My final task was the most important. The radio was my umbilical cord, my only tether to a world that already felt like a distant memory. I flicked the switch, and the cabin filled with a soft, welcome hiss of static. Lookout Tower 7 to Warden Blackwood. Do you copy? Over. My own voice sounded thin, alien. The static crackled, popped, and then a voice broke through, warped and distant, like a transmission from the moon. Oh day, and clear 7, welcome to the edge of the world. How's the view? Over. The man's name was Michael Blackwood. He was a gruff, disembodied presence I'd only spoken to twice before. His voice was all gravel and pragmatism. It's vast, Warden. Just getting settled in. Everything looks secure. Over. Copy that. Weather's clear for now, but keep an eye on the barometer. This place can turn on you. Settle in, get your bearings. Check in at 0800 and 2000 sharp. Don't miss a call, Elias. We don't like mysteries out here. Blackwood out. The radio clicked, and the hiss vanished. The silence that rushed back in was deeper, more profound than before. The brief connection had only served to highlight my isolation. I was truly, utterly alone. I stood there for a long time, watching as the last sliver of sun bled out behind the peaks, painting the underside of the clouds in fiery streaks of orange and red. The world was being painted in shades of twilight and black. The wind moaned its lonely song, and the tower swayed, a tiny rhythmic motion. It was supposed to be a new beginning, a chance to be alone with my thoughts. But as the darkness consumed the landscape, leaving me in a glass box suspended in an ocean of black, I couldn't shake the feeling, the chilling primal certainty, that I wasn't the only one out here, and whatever else was, it was watching me. The first few days passed in a fragile, monotonous rhythm. My life shrank to the size of my glass cage and the simple tasks that filled it. Wake before dawn. Scan the horizon from north to south, a full 360-degree sweep with the binoculars. Brew coffee so strong it could dissolve a spoon. Radio check-in with Blackwood at 0800. Read, scan, log the weather, eat a cold lunch, scan, read some more. Radio check-in at 2000. Watch the world dissolve into darkness, sleep. This routine was my armor. Each completed task was another plate buckled into place, a flimsy defense against the oppressive weight of the wilderness and the gnawing loneliness. The silence was a constant companion, a presence that sat with me at my small table. Some days it felt neutral, but on others, it felt malicious, waiting for my armor to crack so it could flood in and drown me. I was holding it at bay, but I knew, deep down, that I was the intruder here, and my defenses were thin. On the 5th day, the armor cracked. It started not with a sight or a sound, but with a feeling. The air changed. It grew heavy, static, and a strange metallic taste coated the back of my tongue. The pressure in my ears returned, more intense this time, as if the whole sky were a giant hand pressing down on the tower. I glanced at the barometer on the wall. The needle was sinking, not gradually, but in a swift, determined plunge, as if it had been cut loose. I grabbed the binoculars and swept the western horizon. What I saw made the breath catch in my throat. It wasn't just a storm front, it was a wall. A solid, vertical barricade of cloud, the color of a day-old bruise, a churning mass of purple, black, and a sickly yellow-green. It didn't roll or drift. It advanced with a purpose that felt sentient, alive. It was consuming the landscape, erasing the distant mountains from view with unnatural speed. My training kicked in. I grabbed the radio handset, my palms suddenly slick with sweat. "Lookout Tower 7 to Warden Blackwood. Come in, Warden." The static answered, thicker than usual. "Go for Blackwood. What's your status, Elias?" "Sir, my barometer is in free fall. I've got a storm cell moving in from the west. It's the fastest moving front I've ever seen. Looks biblical out here. Over." There was a pause. I could hear him shuffling papers. "Copy that, 7. We're seeing it on our end, too. A real monster. Batten down the hatches and stay put. Do not leave the cabin, for any reason, you understand. Just ride it out and report any damage after it passes. Blackwood out." As he signed off, a flicker of movement on the tundra below snagged my eye. Miles out, where the endless muskeg met the foothills, something was kicking up sprays of dark earth. A caribou, maybe, or a bear. I lifted the binoculars to my eyes, twisting the focus dial until the image sharpened. My heart hammered against my ribs. It wasn't an animal. It was a man. A lone figure, dressed in what looked like a thin jacket, utterly inadequate for the tempest that was about to break. He was moving across the treacherous ground, a broken, uneven hell of boggy pits and sharp rocks, and he was heading directly for my tower. Concern warred with disbelief. No one should be out here. No one could be out here. 4 twists. Then I saw how he was moving. Terrifyingly, fundamentally wrong. He wasn't walking, or even running. He was lurching, skittering across the terrain with an impossible velocity. His limbs moved in spastic, jerky bursts, like a marionette whose strings were being yanked by a frantic, palsied puppeteer. One moment he'd be still, and the next he would lurch forward 50 yards in a blink, his arms and legs flailing at unnatural angles. He'd cover a stretch of ground that would take a seasoned hiker an hour in less than a minute, a desperate, disjointed scramble that defied physics. My mind struggled to process it. Hypothermia? Panic? No, this was something else. This wasn't the movement of a man in distress. It was the movement of something imitating a man, a dead thing trying to remember the mechanics of motion and getting it horribly wrong. It was a dance of pure, silent terror. The first gust of wind from the storm front hit the tower, and the entire structure screamed, a high-pitched shriek of stressed metal. The glass around me bowed inward, and I stumbled back, my hand flying to the wall for support. I ripped the binoculars away from my face, my knuckles white. The storm and the figure were in a race, and my tower was the finish line. The sky was now almost black, the air thick with the promise of ice and fury. And down below, the jerky, impossible puppet man was getting closer, pulled across the dying landscape by his frantic, invisible strings. His silent, spastic flight, the most horrifying thing I had ever seen. The first flakes of snow, hard as bits of flung gravel, struck the glass just as the man reached the base of the tower. In an instant, the world outside was gone, erased by a blinding, vertical torrent of white. The vast wilderness vanished, and my world shrank to the rattling glass cage and the impossible figure now beginning to climb. His ascent was an agony to watch. It wasn't a climb. It was a war waged against his own body. Each step was a jerky, disjointed heave. I could hear the scrape of his boots on the metal stairs and a rhythmic halting sound punctuated by dull thuds as his knee or shoulder slammed into the railing. He moved like a man fighting his own bones, every motion a fresh betrayal. All my instincts screamed that this was wrong, that the thing climbing toward me was a violation of nature. But a different, more human part of me saw only a man about to die in a once-in-a-century blizzard. My duty was clear. A weak, fluttering knock came at the door, barely audible over the shriek of the wind. It was the sound of a dying bird beating its wings against a window. That pathetic sound broke me. I unlatched the heavy bar, my survival instincts roaring in protest, and pulled the door inward. He didn't walk in. He fell, collapsing onto the floor in a heap of sodden clothes and brittle limbs. The blizzard roared into the cabin with him, a blast of ice-fanged air that stole my breath. I shoved the door closed, throwing the bolt just as the full force of the storm hammer-fisted the tower. The entire structure groaned, swaying violently. But the cold that had entered with the man was worse. It was a deep, penetrating chill, a grave cold that seemed to radiate from him, settling in the small space and sinking into my marrow. I knelt beside him, my stomach twisting. Up close, his condition was a nightmare. His skin wasn't just pale. It had a waxy, almost crystalline sheen, like a porcelain doll left out in a deep freeze. Patches of it looked translucent. His lips were blue-black, and his fingertips. Dear God, his fingertips were blackened and shrunken, looking as brittle as charcoal. As I tried to roll him onto his back, his hand flopped against the floor, and the tip of his index finger simply snapped off, clattering away under the table with a dry little tick. A violent, full-body shudder racked his frame, so powerful it lifted him partially off the floor. His teeth chattered, a sound like rattling dice. "It's okay," I said, my voice shaking. "You're safe now. I've got you." I scrambled for the wool blankets, pulling them from my bunk and wrapping them tightly around his shivering form. His eyes, milky and unfocused, fluttered open. They were rimmed with ice. "So cold," he whispered, his voice a dry rasp, each word a visible puff of frozen air. "What's your name? Who are you?" I asked, trying to keep my own voice steady. "Silas," he breathed. My group, we were hiking, from the Kenai." His story came in fragmented, shivering bursts. A hiking trip, a storm that appeared from nowhere just as it had for me. They had gotten separated. He'd seen the light in my tower. It was a plausible story, a tragedy I could understand. It grounded me, giving me a task: save him. I tried to get some lukewarm water into him, but he could barely swallow. The shivers were coming in great convulsive waves, but they were weakening, the periods of stillness between them growing longer. I knew what that meant. His body was giving up. "Just hang on, Silas," I pleaded, more to myself than to him. "The storm will pass. I'll radio for a medevac." He suddenly gripped my arm. His hand was impossibly, unnaturally cold, like a piece of frozen granite. The shivering stopped completely. His cloudy eyes cleared for a single, terrifying moment, and he looked right at me, a focused, desperate lucidity in his gaze. "No," he whispered, his voice suddenly stronger, clearer. "No time. You have to warn them." "Warn who? About what?" His grip tightened, his blackened fingers digging into my jacket. The air in the cabin seemed to crackle. "Warn them," he hissed, his final breath a plume of white smoke carrying the words into the frigid air. "About what's in the ice." His eyes went slack, his jaw fell open, the last of the air rattled from his lungs, and he was still. The grip on my arm loosened, and his hand fell away. "Niall Kersell, Silas was dead." The wind screamed outside, shaking the tower in its furious grip. The blizzard raged, a solid wall of white in every direction. The world was gone. There was only the howling gale, the groaning steel, and the profound, suffocating silence inside the cabin, where I was trapped, 30 feet in the air, with a corpse. "Secure the body and wait for the storm to pass." Warden Blackwood's voice, crackling over the radio through the blizzard's roar, was a monument of detached calm. It was an order from a man sitting in a warm office 100 miles away, a man who wasn't sharing a 10 by 10-foot cage with a corpse. Secure the body. What did that even mean? I had no body bag, no separate room. There was only the floor. After a long, silent moment, I took the spare blanket from my bunk, the one I wasn't using, and draped it over Silas. It was a pathetic, flimsy shroud. Those were the longest 3 days of my life. Miletos. The tower, my supposed sanctuary, became a tomb. The world outside was a howling, white void. The wind hammered the glass, and the steel frame groaned a constant, metallic lament. But the true horror was the silence inside. It was the absolute, dead-still silence of my companion under the blanket. He was a weight, a presence that warped the very fabric of the room. I tried not to look, but he was always there, a lump in my peripheral vision, a focal point of cold that the cabin's small heater couldn't touch. By the second day, my sanity began to fray. I stopped eating. The thought of chewing, of swallowing while a dead man lay 2 feet away, was obscene. Sleep was a mercy that wouldn't come. I would lie on my bunk, staring at the ceiling, listening to the storm and the creak of the tower, every sound magnifying my paranoia. Did the blanket just move? Was that the tower swaying? Or did I see a flicker of motion from the corner of my eye? I started talking to myself, then to him, whispering questions into the oppressive quiet. "Who were you, Silas? What did you see out there?" He never answered. He just lay there, a silent, damning accusation. The isolation was no longer a state of being. It was an active predator, and his body was the bait in its trap. On the morning of the 4th day, I woke to a sudden, brilliant, deafening silence. The storm had broken. I scrambled to the glass, wiping away the condensation. The world was reborn. A pristine, immaculate wilderness of white stretched out in every direction, glittering under a piercingly blue sky. The beauty of it felt like a slap in the face. It was so pure, so clean, while my world, my cage, was so horribly tainted. My duty resurfaced, a piece of driftwood to cling to in a sea of madness. I had to identify him, find his belongings, report to Blackwood. Kneeling beside the body was the hardest thing I'd ever done. The cold radiating from him was still profound. I forced myself to go through his pockets. The fabric of his jacket was stiff, frozen. My fingers, clumsy with dread, found a small, hard-backed notebook in an inner pocket. It was a waterproof field journal, the kind serious hikers and geologists use. A prisoner's ledger. On the cover, in faded marker, was his name, Silas Thorne. I sat at my small table, the journal in my trembling hands, and began to read. Theorus. The first several pages were exactly what you'd expect. Mundane, almost cheerful. Day 1. Air is so clean it hurts to breathe. Jerry already lost a sock. Mountains are watching us. The entries chronicled a normal trip, filled with the small joys and complaints of a group of friends pushing their limits. The handwriting was neat, confident. Then, about halfway through, the tone shifted. The handwriting grew tight, spiky. Day 4. Storm came out of nowhere. Can't see 10 feet. The others, I can't hear them anymore. I'm lost. He wrote of stumbling through the whiteout for what felt like days, his energy failing, the cold sinking in. Then, a miracle. A dark opening in a rock face, a cave. He took shelter, crawling deep inside to escape the wind. His story matched what he'd told me. But then, it went somewhere new, somewhere dark. Deeper in, not a cave. It's a tunnel, smooth, unnatural. There's a glow ahead. Blue. His scrawl became more frantic. He described a vast, central cavern, a cathedral of ancient ice. And in the center of it he found something. Now. My blood went cold. Now. It's a man. No, not a man. Too big. Frozen. Trapped in the ice like an insect in amber. A giant. 10 feet tall if he's an inch. He's bound. Heavy iron chains, black as night, are wrapped around him. I had to put the journal down, my breath coming in ragged gasps. I looked over at the blanket-shrouded form on the floor. Warn them about what's in the ice. With a shaking hand, I picked the journal back up and read the final, terrifying entry. The handwriting was a barely legible scrawl, the pen having dug into the paper with desperate force. His eyes opened. They opened, and he looked at me. He didn't speak, but I heard him. I heard him in my head. He called himself the prisoner, begged me to break the chains. I ran and ran, and I can still hear him. It's not his voice anymore. It followed me out of the cave. It's a different voice now. It whispers. It's learning my fears. God help me. It's wearing the faces of the dead. The journal fell from my fingers, landing with a soft thud on the floorboards. The words echoed in the silent cabin, branding themselves onto the inside of my skull. A giant in the ice. It spoke into my head. It's wearing the faces of the dead. Akada. My rational mind, what was left of it, scrabbled for purchase. It was nonsense. The ravings of a man in the final delirious stages of hypothermia. His brain, starved of oxygen and warmth, had concocted a Lovecraftian fever dream to explain its own demise. It was tragic, horrific, but it wasn't real. The isolation, the corpse, the storm they had primed me, made me susceptible to this madness. I was just projecting his fear onto my own. Ace-cation, I stood up, my legs unsteady, and walked to the window. The brilliant, sun-drenched snow was an affront. Nature was putting on its most beautiful face, mocking the squalid horror contained in my glass box. I needed to breathe. I needed to ground myself in the real. The journal was a story. The body on the floor was a fact. I would call Blackwood, report the ID, and this waking nightmare would begin its slow transition into a memory, a story I'd tell in a bar someday. That's when I heard it. It was faint at first, a whisper carried on the clean, cold air. So faint I thought it was a trick of the wind or a ringing in my ears. Please, I froze, every muscle in my body locking tight. I held my breath, listening. There was only the vast, indifferent silence. I was cracking. I was finally, officially cracking up. The stress had broken something in my head. Help me. There it was again, clearer this time. It wasn't the wind. It was a voice, and the sound of it made my blood not run cold but turn to slush in my veins. It was Silas's voice. I knew that voice. I had listened to its dry, rasping whispers as the life faded from it. But this was different. It was a perfect, soulless recording, stripped of all pain, all desperation, all humanity. It was just the sound, a hollow echo. My heart hammered a frantic, terrified rhythm against my ribs. My eyes darted to the corner of the room, to the grim shape under the blanket, seeking a morbid sort of confirmation. The blanket lay flat on the floor. It was a collapsed, empty shroud. The space where the body of Silas Thorne had been was now just empty floorboards. A strangled noise escaped my throat. I stumbled backward, my hand finding the cold glass of the window, my mind refusing to connect the dots. The voice. The empty blanket. It was impossible. A dream. A hallucination. I pressed my face to the pane, my breath instantly fogging the view, and frantically wiped it away. I looked down, and the world ended. Standing at the base of the tower, in the pristine sunlit snow, was Silas. He was wearing the same thin, frozen jacket. His skin had the same waxy, crystalline sheen. His head was tilted at a slight, unnatural angle, as if the tendons in his neck were no longer quite connected. He was just standing there, one blackened hand resting on the bottom rung of the steel staircase. Then, his head snapped up, and his milky white, dead eyes stared directly at me. The words from the journal screamed in my mind. It's wearing the faces of the dead. As I watched, paralyzed by a terror so profound it felt like a religious experience, the thing that was once Silas began to climb. It was the same impossible, horrifying motion I had seen from a distance across the tundra, a grotesque parody of life. He placed a boot on the first step, then hoisted himself up with a jerky, spastic heave. There was a sound, a dry, clicking pop that carried on the still air, the sound of a frozen joint being forced to bend. It wasn't a man struggling against the cold. It was a dead thing trying to remember how to move. Each step was a puppet's lurch, a disconnected sequence of motions. Scrape, pop heave, click. A slow, a rhythmic, and utterly relentless ascent. It wasn't fueled by muscle and sinew, but by some terrible, unseen volition. The desperate, pleading voice was gone, replaced by the sickening percussion of its climb. This wasn't a rescue. This wasn't a hallucination. The thing from the ice, the prisoner from the journal, had sent its messenger, and it was coming for me. For a full second, I was frozen, a statue of pure terror. My mind was a screaming void, unable to process the sacrilege unfolding on the stairs below. The dry, popping clicks of its ascent were the only sounds in the universe. Then the animal instinct for survival erupted, a volcanic blast of adrenaline that shattered my paralysis. "No," I choked out, stumbling away from the window. "No, no, no." My eyes fell on the heavy steel bar used to lock the door. It was lying on the floor where I had left it after letting Silas in. I scrambled for it, my fumbling hands barely able to get a grip on the cold metal. The rhythmic click-scrape was getting closer. It was halfway up the stairs. I slammed the bar into its brackets across the door just as the first impact came. Boom! It wasn't a knock. It was a dead-weight, full-body slam. The entire cabin shuddered, the glass panes vibrating in their frames. A tin of beans rattled off the shelf and clattered to the floor. The sound was a monstrous heartbeat, a primal drumbeat signaling the start of the siege. Boom! Another impact, just as heavy, just as final. It was mindless, brutish, a thing of pure force trying to break through. Then the voice started again, and it was worse, so much worse than before. "Please, help me. It's so cold." It was Silas's voice, that same soulless recording. But now, it was coming from directly outside the door. A dead man's plea. It was a calculated, psychological torture. It was a key, turning in the lock of my earlier guilt, trying to make me open the door again. "Get away!" I screamed, my voice raw and thin against the rhythmic pounding. "You're not him." As if in answer, a new sound joined the mimicked pleas, a low, guttural growl that seemed to vibrate through the very wood of the door. It was a wet, churning sound, like rocks grinding together at the bottom of a river, and it emanated from the dead man's chest. The voice was a mask, the growl was the truth. I grabbed the radio, my hands shaking so violently I could barely depress the transmit button. "Lookout Tower 7 to Warden Blackwood. Mayday, mayday, mayday." The static hiss felt like an eternity. The pounding on the door continued its relentless rhythm. Boom. "Let me in." Boom. "I'm so cold." "Elias? What in God's name is going on?" Your voice is, "Calm down, son. Report." Blackwood's voice was a lifeline, and I clung to it. "He's here. The dead man, Silas. He's outside my door. He's trying to get in." "He's not dead, Blackwood, or he is. But he's moving. You have to believe me." I was shouting, spewing the words out in a frantic, incoherent torrent. Boom. Growl. There was a long pause on the other end, filled only with static and the sound of the siege. When Blackwood spoke again, his tone had shifted from concerned to clinical. "Elias, listen to me. You've been through a traumatic event. Isolation, stress, it can make the mind see things. There is no one outside your door. The man, Silas Thorne, is dead. You need to take a deep breath and—" "You're not listening!" I shrieked, slamming the handset down on its cradle. He thought I was insane. No one was coming. I was utterly, completely on my own. The pounding stopped. The sudden silence was somehow more terrifying. I held my breath, straining my ears. I heard a faint, dry scraping sound moving along the narrow metal walkway that ringed the cabin. It was circling me. I crept to the window overlooking the south side, peering cautiously over the sill. And there it was. The Silas thing was pressed right up against the glass, its face a pale, waxy mask. Its milky white eyes, devoid of pupil or iris, stared into the cabin, but they weren't seeing me. They were just looking. Its mouth hung open, a black cavity from which the low, guttural growl still rumbled. It raised a blackened, brittle hand and pressed its palm flat against the glass. I flinched back, expecting it to shatter, but instead of cracking, a delicate, intricate web of frost spread out from its palm, blooming across the pane like a crystal flower. It wasn't leaving behind the heat of a living thing. It was leaching the warmth from the world, leaving behind only the cold of the grave. The frost spread, obscuring its face, a beautiful and horrifying testament to the absolute death it carried with it. It stood there for a moment longer, a frozen effigy of dread. Then it turned its head, the motion stiff and clicking, and began to circle again, its footsteps scraping on the metal grate, looking for another way in. The pounding resumed on the door, stronger this time, more frantic. I saw the thick wood of the door jamb begin to splinter. The cage was rattling, and it was about to break. The sound of splintering wood was the sound of my world ending. With every rhythmic, monstrous slam against the door, more cracks spiderwebbed across the frame. The heavy steel bar I'd braced it with was beginning to bend, the metal groaning in protest. The thing outside was tireless. It didn't feel pain, or exhaustion, or the biting cold. It was a machine of pure, malevolent intent, and its only goal was to get inside. "Let me in, Elias." The voice had changed again. It wasn't Silas's hollow mimicry anymore. It was deeper, rougher. It was my name, spoken in a voice like grinding stones. It knew me. I backed away from the door, my eyes scanning the cabin for a weapon, for anything. A cast iron skillet. The fire extinguisher. pathetic defenses against an impossible enemy. The entire tower was shaking now, not just from the impacts on the door, but from the storm of rage being unleashed upon it. It felt like the creature was trying to tear the cabin from its steel legs and send us both plummeting into the snow below. The growl was constant, a low-frequency hum of absolute hatred that vibrated through the floorboards and up into my bones. Then the hinges began to scream, a high-pitched metallic shriek as the screws were torn from the splintering wood. The top corner of the door sagged inward, opening a dark 1-inch gap. A blast of grave, cold air shot through the opening, carrying with it a smell, a scent of damp earth, frozen meat, and something else, an ancient mineral odor like a long, unopened tomb. This was it. It was over. I was trapped 30 feet in the air, my only exit blocked by a reanimated corpse possessed by something ancient. I pressed myself into the far corner of the cabin, making myself small, a pathetic, primal instinct to hide from the predator. I squeezed my eyes shut, waiting for the final crash, for the feeling of its frozen hands on me. And then I heard it. Thump, 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 thump. A sound that didn't belong. A rhythmic, percussive chopping that cut through the creature's growls and the shrieking of the dying hinges. It was distant, but growing closer with impossible speed. A helicopter. Ooh. My eyes snapped open. The thing outside heard it too. The pounding stopped. The growling ceased. I heard the scrape of its boots on the metal walkway as it moved to the edge of the platform, its dead eyes no doubt searching the sky for the source of the noise. Blackwood. He didn't believe me, but my mayday call had forced his hand. Protocol demanded he send a chopper to check on a lookout who sounded like he was having a psychotic break. He hadn't sent a rescue team, he'd sent an ambulance. He'd saved my life by accident. It was my only chance. A sliver of an opportunity so narrow it was almost invisible. The thing was distracted. The door was failing, but it hadn't failed yet. My own barricade was now my prison wall. Maktaras. Amialak. I didn't think. I acted. With a strangled yell, I threw myself against my own barricade. I ripped at the heavy bar, my muscles screaming, and tore it from its buckling brackets. I yanked the door inward, the door I had just fought so desperately to keep closed, and sprinted out onto the walkway. The cold hit me like a physical blow. The air was thin and sharp, burning my lungs. For a terrifying second, I was face to face with it. The Silas thing was standing at the railing, its back to me, its head tilted up toward the approaching sound. It turned, its movements stiff and clicking, and its milky white eyes locked with mine. There was no recognition in them, no anger, just a cold, terrifying emptiness. I didn't wait. I hurtled over a toolbox left on the walkway and flew down the metal stairs, taking them 2, 3 at a time. My feet rang out on the steel, a frantic, clanging drumbeat of escape. I risked a glance over my shoulder and saw the thing scrambling after me. It wasn't running. It was falling down the stairs, its limbs moving with that same jerky, unnatural speed, a grotesque, tumbling pursuit that was somehow faster than my panicked sprint. The grave, cold smell was all around me, clinging to me. I could hear its joints popping, its ragged clothes scraping against the metal behind me. I hit the deep snow at the base of the tower and plunged forward, running with the wild, desperate energy of a prey animal. The helicopter was descending into the clearing 50 yards away, kicking up a hurricane of snow. A man in a flight suit was waving frantically from the open door. "Hurry!" His voice was faint against the rotor wash. I ran harder than I'd ever run in my life, my lungs on fire, my legs screaming. The cold smell was right behind me, so close I felt like I could feel its icy breath on my neck. I didn't look back. I couldn't. I just ran toward the chopper, the thumping blades a hymn of salvation. I reached the aircraft and dove headfirst into the cabin, sprawling onto the cold floor. "Go! Go now!" I screamed, scrambling to my knees. Oh, the pilot didn't need telling. The chopper lurched upward with a force that slammed me back against the bulkhead. As we climbed, clearing the tops of the spruce trees, I crawled to the open door and looked down. The Silas thing stood at the base of the tower, motionless in the swirling snow kicked up by our rotors. It watched us ascend, its head tilted at that same impossible broken-necked angle, and then, as if it knew I was watching, the skin on its frozen face stretched and cracked. Its blue-black lips pulled back from its teeth, splitting the waxy flesh to form a sliver of a black, knowing smile. It wasn't a smile of anger or frustration. It was a smile of patience. A smile that said, "You can run, but you can't hide." It watched me escape, and it let me go. The world of concrete, electricity, and lukewarm coffee felt more alien than the wilderness I had just fled. Back in Fairbanks, the official narrative was constructed with swift, dispassionate efficiency. It was a neat, tidy box designed to contain a messy, incomprehensible event. My frantic, wild-eyed testimony was listened to with clinical patience by doctors, forestry officials, and a stonily silent Warden Blackwood. They nodded, took notes, and shared condescending, sympathetic glances over my head. The diagnosis was a masterpiece of clinical dismissal. Isolation-induced psychosis, complicated by acute stress and hypothermia. My words were reframed as symptoms. The figure in the storm was a hallucination brought on by barometric pressure changes affecting my inner ear. The reanimated corpse of Silas Thorne was a grief-induced delusion, a manifestation of my guilt over being unable to save him. The siege on the tower was a psychosomatic episode, where I likely barricaded myself in and then fought my own barricade in a state of panic. There was no second man, Elias, a doctor with kind, tired eyes told me, his pen poised over a prescription pad. It's not uncommon. The mind plays tricks in that kind of environment. It will invent a monster to give its fear a face. They had an answer for everything. An official search party, dispatched after the storm, found Silas's body. Or, rather, they found what was left of it. According to the report, it had been dragged from the base of the tower and partially consumed by scavengers. A grizzly, they concluded. Plausible. Simple. It explained the state of the body and why it wasn't where I had left it. It explained everything except the frost on the window pane and the splintered door of a cabin 30 feet in the air. Those details were quietly omitted from the final report. And the journal. Silas's horrifying ledger. I had clutched it all the way back, a sacred text of terror, my only proof. Warden Blackwood took it from me with the gentle firmness one uses with a disturbed child. He flipped through it in his sterile office, his face an unreadable mask. "The ravings of a dying man, Elias," he said, closing the book and placing it in a desk drawer as if it were a piece of contaminated evidence. His core body temperature would have been dangerously low. The brain does strange things when it's freezing, creates elaborate fictions. "We found the cave," he mentioned. "It's just a cave. There's nothing in there but some old animal bones." He didn't believe me. Of course he didn't. To believe me would be to admit that the meticulously mapped and managed wilderness he presided over contained a horror beyond his comprehension. It was easier to believe I was crazy, a cracked cog in an otherwise orderly machine. I was offered medical leave, therapy, a transfer to a less isolated post. I refused it all. I signed my resignation papers that afternoon. Id Loa. No one was going to look for the prisoner. No one was going to heed Silas's final, desperate warning. The giant in the ice, bound in ancient chains, would remain a secret, slumbering and waiting. The thing that wore the faces of the dead was still out there, under the silent watch of the mountains, and I was the only person on earth who knew it was real. The knowledge was a poison, a shard of ice lodged permanently in my soul. I bought a one-way ticket to the furthest place I could think of, a destination with no mountains, no endless forests, no oppressive silence. I just needed to be gone. I needed to be surrounded by the meaningless, anonymous noise of a million people. As the plane climbed through the clouds, I pressed my forehead against the cool plastic of the window, looking down one last time at the jagged, snow-capped peaks of the Alaska Range. The cursed land shrank below me, becoming a map again, an abstraction of rock and ice. For a moment I felt a flicker of hope. Maybe distance would be enough. Maybe I could outrun the memory. Maybe the doctor was right, and a new environment, a new life, would heal the crack in my mind. But the horror I'd faced wasn't a product of isolation. It was a predator, and I had let it out of its hunting grounds. Behind the steady, deafening drone of the jet engines, I heard it. It wasn't a sound from outside, it wasn't a memory. It was inside my own head, as clear and as present as my own thoughts. A familiar, desperate whisper, a perfect, soulless recording of a dead man's plea, now repurposed just for me. Help me. The voice wasn't screaming, it wasn't threatening. It was quiet, patient. It had followed me from the cave. It had learned Silas's fears, and now it was starting to learn mine.